Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting virtual tour with Pretty Gritty Tours. I'm your guide tonight, Chris, and tonight we are delving into the exciting town of Bucoda, or as it's known through the month of October, Bucoda. The town of Bucoda has an official proclamation every October where they rename the town to Bucoda, and I mean, they go hard. As far as towns in Washington and the United States that do Halloween, they go all out. They have like a pine box derby where you make your own coffin and race it down the street. They have a hearse procession. They have a haunted house in an actually haunted gym. They do the whole 9 yards, 6 feet under and everything, and it's phenomenal. They do a really good job with it. But to give you guys some background on the town of Bucoda itself, before we actually dive into the haunted history of it, I think it's important that you know something about it. Like, for example, where is it? Because it's out there. You have to go, and this is crazy, as a landmark, look for Tenino. It is essentially right next door to the town of Tenino, sort of south of the Olympia area and a little bit east of there. And if you're looking at historic sort of photos of it, this is what you're looking at here. And it began actually in 1828 with a guy named Aaron Webster who arrived. Aaron Webster was from 1828. Bucoda wasn't founded until 1854. And he sort of took over the area and then sold it to another guy named Oliver. And then it became important for the Northern Pacific Railroad. But all of this out there, if you can take a look, sort of sprung up predominantly with the lumber industry and then with the first territorial prison in Washington state. And then they found a coal mine, so on and so forth. But it was originally called Seatco, which we'll talk more about here in a second. And then in the 1870s, it got rebranded to Bucoda, based on the first two letters of the three names of the initial investors, which were Buckley, Coulter, and David. You take the BU, the CO, the DA, and you come up with Bucoda, giving us the town as we have it today. And it's spooky, man. It's only like 570 people population-wise, and it, even without the Halloween paraphernalia, is just got a weird, dark vibe to it. And so that's what we're going to explore tonight. If you guys have any questions tonight, feel free to shoot them to me as we go along. But let's jump in, shall we? Of all the truly terrifying and haunted places in Washington state, this small town right here, Bucoda, has to be in my top 10. As you probably gathered at this point, a lot of our tour tonight is actually going to have been filmed on location out there in Bucoda. And we started right here at the multi-purpose building. This is the Bucoda Community Center, the City Council Chamber, City Hall, and so on and so forth. And it's located right down there on the main street. And this is the location where they came up with the idea. Mayor Carr there on the right, who decided in 2009 that they were going to rebrand to Bucoda, and then they would do, the spooktacular, all of the haunted houses and everything. And here's a snapshot in front of that community center there of the Pine Box Derby. But the story of Bucoda and its haunted history goes so much deeper than that, from the origin of the name Seatco. Seatco is what the area was called by the indigenous nations that were there before the area was established by the white colonizers out there. And Seatco means ghost place or haunted area. And it's sort of the genesis of the Bigfoot story throughout the Pacific Northwest. There's also a coal mine, an abandoned coal mine in the area out there that's had tremendous paranormal activity attached to it since it was shut down, and quite a few disasters that happened down there. The town itself, essentially every enterprise that they've tried to undertake has somehow ended in large losses of life or really tragic working conditions. And we're going to really talk about that. So let's introduce you to Bucoda itself. As the site for Washington's first territorial penitentiary, before they moved the penitentiary out to Walla Walla, this was a for-profit prison on the grounds right here, where it was already a location that was known to have been haunted by the indigenous people in the area that avoided it altogether. And so this site here, where the town now is, has been abandoned and avoided since the very early days. It's the penitentiary that first intrigued me about the area. When you're looking at Bucoda, if you go right to the edge of town onto Seatco Street, you are on the foundation of Washington Territory's first prison. And it's that building in the background there. It was this 2-story wooden structure where you would have to go up a ramp to access the second floor from the outside, because there was no entrance or exit from the first floor. And that's where they kept the prisoners. And it was essentially 2 feet thick of this lumber out there with these thick iron bars right there. So they have this window on display in the city hall, which is that community building we showed you early on, and a lot of shackles and chains that would have been used on the prisoners while they were there. And the city hall building has security cameras inside of it, and they're constantly detecting just weirdness. Things will fall off shelves, things will move around inside the glass cases inside the building there, even though no one's inside the building, just in the middle of the night. And once you start digging into the history of that penitentiary, it's not difficult to understand why there would be such tremendous grief and sorrow attached to the area, and possibly more paranormal activity would adhere to that. As a for-profit prison, the sheriff that ran it, anyone who was delivered to the penitentiary, he could do whatever he wanted. So he not only got paid for having each prisoner in that building, but any labor that he wanted them to do, he could keep all of the profit for. So you had this chain gang at its peak of 77 inmates from that first penitentiary, running for 9 years, that would go back and forth across the rail line, milling timber, crushing rocks, doing anything that the sheriff wanted them to do. And quite a few of them perished under those conditions. It's believed that in those 9 years, well upwards of 200 inmates died from the conditions inside the penitentiary and were buried in a mass grave not far from where it was. Today, the site is vacant. This building ended up burning down in an unrelated lumber mill fire in the 1930s. And the 1930s is sort of the freeze frame for Bucoda. After the lumber mill disappeared in that fire, the city's fortune kind of went with it. And the only thing that remains today of that penitentiary are some of these iron footings like you see right here. We're going to take you actually down into it really quick so that you can see the site today. Certainly the beginning of this town starts here at what was the Seatco Territorial Penitentiary site. When this town first began, it was the first territorial prison for the Washington area, and the foundation of it was right here. The 2-story wooden structure no longer exists today, but so many of those spirits still remain. of the most truly terrifying parts of this town, right back here at the area where the old Seattle Penitentiary used to be, there's a river. The Skookumchuck River flows at the back end here, and for me, it's the area that gives me the weirdest vibe, and is also the place where so many people have sent us audio recordings or told us stories that they come down to this river at night, they'll hear something approach from the other side of the river, come right up to the water line, and they'll see the bushes move, but nothing back there. The audio that you're about to hear is from this area. Yeah, I hate that sound. And multiple people have sent us audio recordings of the area out there, and it's always a similar sound, which is really terrifying. So when I say that I think it's one of the most haunted places I've been into Washington State, I really mean it. And we got someone asking even more than Stillicum, and yeah, I think so. You know, the Seattle Bucoda area has always just had that darkness to it, so much so that it was avoided by, the tribes that were living in the area well before that. And that's that genesis of the Seattle or the Stick Indian story, which I know I've talked about a few times on previous tours, but I'll tell you guys more about tonight. But I want to show you another one of the audio clips there. And before I do, we're going to take you guys to the train tracks. Now, the train tracks run right through the Bucoda town site as part of the original rail line that went through the state of Washington. And it has been the site of quite a few tragedies. They have approximately 84 trains that run through daily, and they've always had darkness and sadness to them. And it was in 1939 that the biggest tragedy happened out there when a Union Pacific train derailed when it hit a lumber truck, killed quite a few of the passengers, as well as the engineer and the driver of the lumber truck. And since that time, the train tracks have always had reports of some sort of paranormal activity attached to them. We'll let you guys take a look here really quick. Yeah, absolutely. The Seattle legend, or Seattle meaning this ghost place or haunted place, is also the use name for these creatures that walk in the woods. And the story is that they hunt in the woods, that they're like somewhere in between animal and human, and particularly in the Seattle Bucoda area is their predominant hunting ground. And that in the winter, they come out in force, lure people into the woods, and then kill them. And that screech is always heard in the area around there. Now, I've never seen anything out there, and no one that I know has been able to provide footage of seeing anything out there, but the sound can sometimes be terrifyingly close. To show you guys a little bit more of the area, we're going to take you just down the street from the community center, where there is a house that is sort of at the beginning of my doll story for Bucoda. If you hate dolls, buckle up. You're really going to hate this. When I first started doing investigations about Bucoda, I kept getting more and more stories of people saying that in the middle of the night, they would think that dolls in their home would be moving. And there's parallels between the stories where people would say that they would all be looking towards the gym in the middle of the night. That no matter where they placed the doll, that they would find it the next morning, and in the smallest scenarios, just the head would be turned to be facing the gym on the far side of town. In the most extreme cases, they would find the doll actually on the other side of the home, again, facing to where the gym is. All throughout Bucoda, when I've been down there will just be doll parts throughout the entire town, in the bushes, on the road, everywhere. And again, they usually get higher in their concentration closer you get to the gym. Now, if you're curious about that gym, here we go. It's actually the permanent residence year-round for the doll Abby. Abby has had countless incidents that have been recorded of her interacting with people or messing with people who don't show her the proper respect. If you want confirmed hauntings and paranormal activity, you don't have to look much farther than this 1930s gym right downtown in Bucoda. They have all sorts of activity going on here constantly. Now, normally this would be set up as the haunted house down here, but in the off season and right now, it's just an empty shell reserved for the ghosts in town. Abby is this small animatronic doll that lives year-round inside the gym, and while they've removed her batteries, she'll still respond to people. They've had incidences where she'll only talk to the mayor, and people will come in and mess with her or, make fun of the haunted aspect of her, and she won't respond to them. It's been something that's happened in multiple people's dreams throughout town, that they've seen Abby come to them in the middle of the night and ask them to do something. And the next morning when they wake up, they find that any doll that was in their house has been moved over to the side of the wall. And I was told that that house we saw earlier, that's all burned out now, in it, every single doll in that room would just fall off the shelf or the bed or the chair and roll across the floor to the far side of the house and just be staring towards the gym in the middle of the night. When they hired someone to come in and paint the gym to make it ready for the annual haunted house, he ended up quitting. He left the job because he said he just heard little footprints behind him when he was in there painting, and that where Abby used to be, she wasn't there anymore. She would move across the gym while he was in there. So done with it. Anytime that someone wants to get rid of a doll, they donate it to the mayor or the city council, and it ends up inside the gym with Abby. So there's just now this army of possessed dolls residing in that 1939 gym in there. Now, what's so weird about this building for me is that it's the only one that has survived the era of the mill. Back when the lumber mill was in Bucoda, it was known as the town with $1 million payroll because it had so many employees working to churn out so much lumber that they were just creating a ton of money. When that mill burned down, it never rebounded as a town. The only building that remains from that era is this gym, constructed in 1939, and it's had multiple people pass away inside it. And despite its age and the tragedies inside it, it's never gone away. It has been an area where a lot of people have done paranormal investigation. And as you can see from the photo here, people will frequently photograph these orbs. And I wish I had video footage for you guys, because if you watch them, they will move at right angles, like 90 degrees, and then convalesce into the middle of the room. They've had times where they've done experiments where they'll put like a basketball in the middle of the gym and then surround it with jump ropes or books or something so it can't just roll away. And they'll come back in the morning and find the basketball at the back of the gym in the corner or completely out of the building. The fact that all of those dolls find themselves turned towards the gym in the middle of the night is one of the things that freaks me out the most about Bucoda. If you're looking for really cool places to go that are also haunted, well, you're in luck. Immediately across the train tracks from that huge tragedy with the Union Pacific, there is a location that used to be called Bucoda's First Tavern. This is now known as Joe's Place and was a sort of Great Depression era pub in the area that started way earlier than that, but it burned down. And so, like every other place, was forced to rebuild. So this structure that's been built of brick here is now the second of Joe's Place. It was established before Bucoda was even a town. And then when it became incorporated, he essentially just took his home bar and turned it into an actual place there. That was in 1898 with Joe Farrington right there on Main Street. And it's only ever been owned by the same family. Eventually, Joe's Place manager, Chrissy Butterworth, took over with the place, and it continues to operate as not only the best, but the only bar in town right there. And I think we've got some footage for you right here. It's said that the manager that took over after the fire here was a very particular woman. And so when they rebuilt this building, she was known for being particularly harsh on the people that worked there. And they think that she might still be inside the tavern because people that have worked there in the 100 years since will be closing up, and if they don't put things away in the proper location, they'll fly off the counter or fly off the shelf. And the most terrifying occurrence of that happened when one woman who was closing up the bar in the middle of the night dried knives and just left them on the counter, didn't put them back on the magnetic rack. And she said as she was getting ready to leave, one of those knives stuck into the wall next to her head. She continued working there despite that incident, but was more respectful about the places that she put things after that. The TV in Joe's Place has also been known to flicker, just have static come onto it, and they'll hear what sounds like a man's voice saying something that nobody quite understands when he starts speaking. Now, Joe's Place is still operational. They're not open on Mondays, but if you're looking for a location to give you the true flavor of the area, it's definitely worth checking out down there. Now, the origin of the Seatco stick Indian Bigfoot unknown creature out in the woods is pervasive in the area. It's definitely something that has been widely reported, but so is the story of the Moss Woman, which came to me pretty recently, actually, that there is a legend that sticks to the Bucoda area that there is a woman who looks just like a moss-covered log out in the woods there. But as you get closer, she suddenly springs into action and grabs people and drowns them in the woods out there, particularly in the Skookumchuck River. It was a legend that I hadn't heard about the area until very recently, but once I started asking people about it, there were multiple people who said that they've seen something that looks just like a moss-covered log out there in the woods, and then as soon as they get closer, it moves, and they get the heck out of there as quickly as possible. I think as far as really spooky places out there, one of the ones that we've gotten the most stories about are the Devil's Tree. The story goes that there were some kids playing out here in Volunteer Park when, in the middle of the night, they just felt like an intense heat, and they looked over, and in the archway of this tree back here, there was a bright light shining through. and they saw what looked like these slender figures crawl out through that way, and other voices start beckoning to them to come down in there, and that they realized it was an entrance to hell. And I can tell you right now, there is a weird vibe out here in this park. Like, it's like, I don't even know. There's like a weird vibe out here that I can't quite place right now. But it's like, I don't know if anyone else can hear that. There's like a really loud boom. Can you see the footprints there as well? Paul? Hey, Paul. Where are you?
I'm behind you.
You see that?
The swing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That is super weird. Did anyone run around out here?
Just you and me, I think.
So that is the weirdest thing that happened that night, that Paul and I went out there to get footage and do some investigation. Paul was on the other side of the park behind me trying to get footage of the tree at that point, but the swing would continue to go throughout the night. And you can see when you play back through the footage, there are these dark footprints in the gravel there. But neither of one of us heard anyone running around in the park that night. But there was just this like intense energy, like there was someone else in the park with us. I want to show you guys the tree here because it's difficult to describe, but it's got such an eerie energy to it once you see it. Like I was saying, the original story about it is that there's just an intense heat and light that comes out of Volunteer Park, and that the people who have seen it say that it comes from the archway here in this tree. Now, this particular tree has been around since Bucoda was founded. No one has ever chopped it down, even though there's been multiple talks about it. But this building on the fringe of the park was just an empty pump house, but the light in there would keep coming on and then back off. We didn't see anyone else in the park with us that whole night, but it always felt like there was someone just a couple steps behind us. I don't know if you can hear it, but while we were in the park here in a second, it sounds like a little girl giggles. Volunteer Park, this particular evening, was the area that had just the overall creepiness for me. Normally, it's that dollhouse that we got to see earlier, the one that was burned out, because we've seen just like armies of doll parts surrounding that building all around it. But that particular night that we were getting footage, hands down, Volunteer Park just had the weirdness all around it. But it's always reported the same way. And I think what's really spooky about the town are the communal nightmares. People who have lived in town have said, you know, that they'll have this nightmare, sometimes about Abby, sometimes about something coming out of the woods and speaking to them. They'll never see the shape, but they'll just hear the voice, and that they'll hear it like coming from the river or from down away the train track. And it's just like a pull of someone asking them to do something. But they'll talk to people, like usually in Joe's place, and they'll find out that they all had the same nightmare. And there was a house on the edge of town that was eventually demolished not too long ago, but it had, without a doubt, the highest concentration of people having that nightmare. It was said that if you were in the house just during the day, it would feel like heavy, warm, and humid. And that in the middle of the night, when people were sleeping in there, they would have the same nightmare. Everyone in the house would dream the same thing. When they eventually demolished the house, it was just on the far side of where the Seattle Penitentiary was, and they took it down. It was completely abandoned at this point, old Latin Plath home. But in the basement of that home, on the stone walls down there, unfinished basement, they just found what looked like claw marks all across the stones down there. Now, as far as the tree goes, because we're getting some good questions here, it is not burnt. The inside has a level of rot to it, but the tree itself is perfectly sturdy, and there are no scorch marks anywhere on it. And no, absolutely not. Under any circumstance would I ever crawl through that tree. That is bananas. This is an interesting point, though, because there was another tree planted around the same time, they think, or just grew up around the same time as this devil tree out there. And they did find it had a significant level of rot to it, so they chainsawed that sucker down. And now there's a large stump there that you can crawl into and like come out the hole on the bottom of. And ever since they chainsawed it down, it has had the absolute worst occurrences to it. Not only have people reported seeing stuff like crawling out of it in the middle of the night or experiencing a light coming from the hollow stump, but they've had actual reported accidents where people have just been like climbing around and they'll feel like they are getting pulled inside of it and end up getting stuck and have to get pulled out, usually by like an emergency responder in the area. That they'll say that their foot is stuck or something, but when they get pulled out, nothing is actually attached to the tree. They just were held by some presence down inside of that stump. Horrifying. So we're going to take you briefly now to Forest Grove Cemetery, which is just outside of Tenino, right next door to Seattle/Bucoda. And that is the area where the mass grave was, where those 200 plus people that died during their incarceration at the Seattle Penitentiary were buried, unmarked. It's believed that those that perished in the Seattle Penitentiary were buried in a mass grave somewhere out here in the Forest Grove Cemetery. That undisclosed location is somewhere on the fringe of the cemetery today. The entire time that Paul and I were out here, the fog just kept getting thicker. It was like someone was pouring it into the cemetery out here in the middle of the night. And there was this chime sound. Like a wind chime almost, but somewhere in the cemetery. And it was never coming from the same location. It was almost as if there were multiple small wind chimes out here in the cemetery. Don't like that. Also, just the age of some of these headstones out here was amazing. So many from the 1880s.
Do you hear that? The chime?
If you're looking for an activity to do in the middle of the night and you're really into sort of that paranormal investigation, or if you want to go to a bar that's had Olympia beer on tap since it was opened, you really look no farther than Bucoda. If you guys have additional questions about the town, I encourage you to ask them, because it's just a fascinating location and an undiscovered part of Washington's history. The fact that this territorial prison was out there for so long, as well as the most fiscally significant lumber mill for a period of time, and these large railroad disasters, and the origin story of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, for a majority of the state, and that it has just disappeared into antiquity, being forgotten every day that we neglect it, is striking. So with that said, this is an excellent time to remind you guys that if you've enjoyed your virtual tour tonight and you'd like to tip your guide, you can do so at prettygrittytours.com. Right there on the homepage of our site, there's a little PayPal button. Tips are never expected, always appreciated. Also, moving now into November, if you guys have suggestions, recommendations, or inquiries about anything in the greater Pacific Northwest or abroad that you'd like to know something about, we are putting together our new roster for virtual tours moving forward, and we're always happy to take suggestions. I don't know why that word's so difficult. So I hope you guys had a good time tonight. I'm looking forward to seeing you out here on our next virtual tour, but until then, keep your comments coming. Let us know. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're always around trying to do exploration. And yes, Port Gamble. Done deal. Port Gamble is coming up next on our list for sure. So see, it's that easy. Make a suggestion. It's going to happen. Yikes. All right, guys. Thank you so much. As always, I'm Chris. I'm encouraging you to keep on exploring. See you soon.